Hi, I'm Danny Quinn, and welcome to another episode of First Impressions. So, the last week of August was pretty crazy, wasn't it? That new Catherine Bigelow movie, Detroit, finally hit cinemas in the UK, that new Tom Cruise vehicle snuck out a month early before its American release, and Steven Soderbergh's Logan Lucky finally hit cinemas as well. So I decided to tackle all three of them as part of one video, just to save some time. So let's get started. Set during the 1967 Detroit riots, this movie largely revolves around a police raid on the Algiers motel after several officers overheard gunshots coming from that area. Several police officers, including Will Poulter's Philip Krauss, line up a handful of guests, including the Dramatics lead singer Larry Reid, played by Algie Smith, and subject them to acts of violence and intimidation in order to force a confession out of them in an infamous act of police brutality. Director Catherine Bigelow is probably most well known for her cult films like Point Break, Strange Days and Near Dark, but in recent years she's become more well known for her gritty and intense approach to real life subject matter, as indicated by films such as The Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30, the former of which even won her an Oscar for Best Director, and now she's re-teamed with Hurt Locker and Zero Dark 30 screenwriter Mark Boal for their newest film together, Detroit, which is sort of similar to those two films in that it examines a true event in a similar gritty documentary-like style, but it's also different in that it looks at an event from the past as opposed to more contemporary events. The film has this very raw style to it. There's a lot of handheld camera work that gives the movie an almost documentary-like feel to it. It's very reminiscent of the work of Paul Greengrass on films like the Bourne sequels and Captain Phillips. But unlike a lot of Greengrass imitators, the film actually uses these techniques very effectively. The camera work and editing does an excellent job putting you into the events of the film, and the use of sound is especially very effective, particularly during the more chaotic and frantic moments in the film, but also during the more quieter and more ominous moments in the film too. And Bigelow's directing is very intimate. It really makes you feel like you're a part of the events and what's going on in the film. And the movie is also very suspenseful and unrelenting. The entire Algiers motel portion of the film is very unnerving and chilling. The sound, the camera work and editing really do a great job of making you feel like you're a part of the event. So whenever somebody is actually punched in the face or shouted at, you feel like you're there, you feel like you're in the moment. It does kind of remind me a little bit of Dunkirk in that both movies do a really good job of highlighting just the terror that these people faced. Just the uncertainty, the sense of dread. And they both do it in kind of similar ways, particularly for the use of sound. But whereas Dunkirk was more of a straight up thriller with very tight pacing and never let up from beginning to end, Detroit is much more of a slow burner. Similar to Dunkirk, we sort of view the movie through three different perspectives. For instance, John Boyega plays a security guard who ends up involved in the incident, and he's sort of conflicted. He empathises with the plight of the people involved in the incident, but he sort of justifies it by saying they're just doing their job, they're doing what they think they have to do in order to try and find whoever fired the shots. And he sort of serves as the middle ground, because on one hand, he's not really shown much respect by other police officers, but on the other hand, he's not really given much respect because of his role as an authority figure. But he's also trying to do the right thing, and he's just unfortunate enough to have to bear witness to the atrocities being committed that night. And Boyega is absolutely fantastic in the part. I've heard at least a couple of reviewers compare him to a young Denzel Washington, and I gotta say I completely agree after having seen this film. He's really good. Algie Smith plays this singer in an R&B band who is sort of distanced from the Detroit riots because he's not actually directly involved in them until they end up having to cancel the show, and he ends up separated from the other bands, and then he just happens to end up at the motel. He's very much a wrong guy in the wrong place at the wrong time sort of thing. And the movie sort of examines how he's sort of changed as a result of these riots. Like, he's very hardened and shaken by what happens to him. It really affects him psychologically. And Smith is also very good in the part too. I haven't really seen him in anything, but I think he is really good here. And Will Poulter plays the leader of the cops carrying out the raid. He's this very racist, very bigoted asshole, but at the same time he also kind of justifies it as doing what he thinks he has to do in order to solve who fired the shots. He thinks he's just doing his job. But as the movie goes on, you begin to see a much more loathsome and unpleasant side to the character as he gradually unravels as a result of what's happening. And Poulter does an absolutely fantastic job in the part. He's very hateful and loathsome, but he's also very scary and genuinely intimidating as well. It's a part that could have definitely went very over the top if miscast or mishandled, but Poulter actually manages to do a very solid job in the role, I think. It's definitely a real surprise. That being said, the film's not perfect. It does have its problems. It starts out a little weird and clunky with this strange animated prologue that's serviceable in telling you the history of the events and the backstory behind the history of Detroit and all, but it just feels a little weird and out of place with the rest of the film. And I do think the movie's a tad too long at 143 minutes. It could have wrapped up a lot quicker than it did. It honestly gets to the point where there's a lot of scenes where you think the movie's gonna end, but it doesn't. It just keeps going. It's not a huge problem, mine, and it doesn't detract from the film completely, but I do think that the movie could have benefited from slightly tighter pacing. But overall, I really enjoyed Detroit. The directing, the camera work, the editing, and the sound all do a fantastic job of making you feel like you're a part of the event. The acting is especially great from Boyega, Poulter, and Smith. But while I think it's a great movie, it's not one I would really rush out to see again, and it is a bit of a top sit. In a good way, I mean. Nevertheless, I'm gonna give Detroit an 8 out of 10. I definitely recommend seeing Detroit, it's just that it is a bit of a tough watch. So, from one true story to another. This movie is set in the late 1970s and early 1980s, and it tells the story of Barry Seal, played by Tom Cruise, an airline pilot who becomes involved in the CIA's war on communism and works for Pablo Escobar as a double agent, becoming stinking rich in the process. However, he can't stay at the top forever, and he soon finds himself under the watchful eye of the DEA, and it's only a matter of time before his empire comes crashing down. Now, I have to admit, I'm not the hugest fan of biopics. A lot of the time they just seem like cynical and blatant attempts to get Oscars, but when they're done well, they can be done very well. So when I first heard that Tom Cruise and Doug Liman were reteaming for this film based on a true story about a man who worked for the CIA, the DEA, and Pablo Escobar, I was definitely intrigued. Indeed, there's a lot of intrigue to the story. It delves into the shady tactics that the government would have used to combat communism during the latter half of the Cold War. And it also taps into that whole greed is good mentality that was so prevalent during the Reagan years. But at the same time, it's also a fascinating look into a man who built a criminal empire all through the government's approval. It's kind of like The Wolf of Wall Street and Scarface, except without a lot of the excesses of those movies. And Cruise's character isn't a greedy and sociopathic asshole who's constantly chewing the scenery. Yes, Seal does engage in quite a few questionable activities, but he's not inherently a bad guy or an outright villain. He's just somebody who's trying to provide for his family, and you can tell that he genuinely loves them. He's trying to do what he thinks is best for them. It's just that he's unable to grapple with the consequences of his actions and of his decisions. And he'll basically do anything in order to try and stay out of jail. And he's also caught in this big rivalry between the CIA and the DEA, who use him almost like a puppet in a way. Yeah, they can provide him with weapons and planes and all this equipment to make him rich, but they can just as easily put his life in jeopardy and leave him to take the fall in order to save their own backs. And Cruise is absolutely incredible in the role of Barry Seal. I have to admit that even though Cruise is generally very good in action movies, and I always admire his commitment to the action and to the stunts and all, even I think his characters can sometimes be very interchangeable, and you can sometimes get the feeling that he's just playing a stock Tom Cruise archetype, but that's definitely not the case here. I actually feel like he is playing a character, and not just the stock Tom Cruise action role where he runs away from explosions and sandstorms. It also helps that Cruise has a great supporting cast to work off of. Sarah Wright does a really good job in the role as Cruise's wife, even if she doesn't exactly voice any opposition to his criminal activities, weirdly enough. Domhnall Gleeson is also great as this mysterious CIA operative who serves as Cruise's contact, and sort of serves as a representative of the CIA's role in this movie. And there's also solid supporting turns in Jesse Plemons, Jayma Mays, and especially Caleb Landry Jones as Seal's brother-in-law, who aside from Cruise is probably the best performer in the entire movie. He has some of the movie's best moments. The writing is overall very solid, it's sharp and witty and does a really good job of keeping you on the edge of your seat, while Lyman's directing really complements the script very well. His directing is very slick and stylish, and it's also kind of reminiscent of Catherine Bigelow's directing in Detroit to some extent. He makes quite a bit of use of handheld camera work in a lot of the scenes in order to try and make the movie seem more intimate and personal, but sometimes I think his directing is a little bit overdone. It kind of takes me out of the experience in places. There's a lot of scenes with artificial grain and filtering effects, which I suppose is done to try and make the movie seem more reflective of its time period, but it just kind of took me out of the experience all the time. And the movie's pace is really fast. It jumps from scene to scene with very little downtime, but sometimes I think it's a little bit too fast. The film really does struggle staying in place for more than 3 minutes before jumping to the next scene or the next phase of Barry Seal's crazy life. And it does feel a little bit choppy in places. There's some scenes I think could have been elaborated on a wee bit more before we just jump to the next scene. And the storytelling structure, especially in the beginning of the film, did take a lot of time for me to get used to, because the film just kind of jumps back and forth between these various stages of Seal's life. But in the end, American Made is a solidly made biopic with an excellent performance from Tom Cruise. That definitely makes up for his lackluster turn in The Mummy earlier this year. The script is witty and occasionally insightful with its many twists and turns. Lyman's directing is very well done, it's slick and stylish. There's some good stunt work and some really stunning cinematography. However, it's a little bit too jumpy in its pacing and structure, and Lyman's directing is a little bit too flashy in places. I'm gonna give American Made a 7 out of 10. I'd recommend seeing American Made. It's a good time, it's fun, it's funny, Cruise is absolutely excellent in it. And it is overall a very solid film, just not quite a great one. This movie is about Jimmy Logan, played by Channing Tatum, a man who is down on his luck. He's just been laid off from his job at the Charlotte Motor Speedway, and his relationship with his ex-wife and daughter is rather strained, and it all seems like it's part of a curse that affects him, his brother Clyde, played by Adam Driver, and his sister Mellie, played by Riley Keough. Determined to break the curse, he recruits his siblings and safecracker Joe Banks, played by Daniel Craig, to carry out an ambitious heist on the Speedway during an upcoming event. However, complications soon arise when a mix-up forces them to carry out the heist much earlier than anticipated and attracts unwanted attention. Steven Soderbergh is definitely an odd case when it comes to directors. He's made a lot of blockbuster movies like the Ocean's Trilogy and Contagion, but he's a director that plays very much by his own rules. And he's very versatile in his output, which ranges from psychological thrillers to wacky comedies to downbeat dramas. He's a man who can tackle any type of movie, big or small, artistic or commercial, sad or funny. And although it seemed that he was going to be retiring a few years back after the release of his film Side Effects and Behind the Candelabra in 2013, he's now back after a 4-year hiatus with his newest film Logan Lucky, and he's even got another film coming up which has been shot on an iPhone. Wow, that is impressive. And I'll hopefully talk about that movie someday, but for the time being, let's discuss Logan Lucky. It's definitely a very odd and quirky little movie. It's kind of like Ocean's 11, but in the Midwest and without the gloss and glamour. And Soderbergh's directing is definitely on point. His directing is sharp and quick, and there's a good sense of timing to the jokes and humour in this movie, and there's a real sense of confidence and flair to the directing, which is always something I admire in a film. And given the really positive buzz that this movie has received so far, I really want to say that I love it. But that would be dishonest of me. Don't get me wrong, it's not a bad movie by any means. It is very enjoyable and there's a lot to like about this movie. For one, it is actually quite funny. It's definitely one of the better comedies I've seen this year. The humour is definitely more hip than miss, although I wouldn't say it's a laugh out loud romp per se. The humour in this film I'd say is very subtle, and there's probably a lot of background jokes that I didn't get on my first viewing, so I look forward to watching the movie again at some point in the future. But the other thing this movie has going for it is its characters. While the plot of the movie is pretty simple and isn't really anything to write home about, it is just a simple heist movie after all, it's the characters that really make the story work. I really like the Logan siblings. They're very likeable protagonists. Channing Tatum's Jimmy is pretty much the straight man of the group. He's basically trying to organise this big heist in order to try and break the supposed family curse, but he's also a family man. He's trying to be there for his family. You can understand his motivations for wanting to carry out this heist. And Riley Keough gives a very entertaining performance as Mellie, the sister who always makes up for Jimmy's shortcomings as a father. She's always looking out for his daughter and helping her out whenever he can't. But the highlight of the trio is easily Adam Driver's Clyde, the one-armed bartender, who easily has some of the movie's best lines, and there's some really good gags involving his artificial arm, which I did think were really funny. However, where Logan Lucky really shines the most, in my opinion, is in its supporting cast. There's some really entertaining and quirky characters that are brought to life by some really talented actors. There's Seth MacFarlane as this rude British businessman, and Sebastian Stan as this NASCAR driver he's promoting. There's an entertaining dynamic there, and he is pretty funny. Catherine Waterston briefly shows up as Jimmy's old crush, although she is largely wasted and she doesn't really do much in the movie. Dwight Yoakam is really amusing as this weak-willed Warren who's trying to negotiate during a prison riot. Brian Gleeson and Jack Quaid are really entertaining as these two redneck brothers who get involved in the heist. And there's some good banter between the two of them, as well as between them and the Logan brothers. But the main highlight out of the entire cast, and easily one of the biggest surprises in this movie for me personally, is Daniel Craig. He's this very eccentric bomb expert who's doing time in jail, and the crew have to figure out how to get him out of jail, help out on the heist, and then get him back without anybody noticing. There's some really good humour and some really great fun there. And Craig is absolutely excellent in the part. He really carries the scenes he's in. The character is just very eccentric and funny. He has some great lines of dialogue and this very exaggerated American accent that really did get a few laughs from me. And Craig really does a terrific job in the part. It's so surprising to see him in a role like this, because I always associate him with very dramatic and very serious and very humorless roles. So it's nice to see that he can play so wildly against type and not only do it, but also do it so well. So yeah, the movie is definitely entertaining and it's a lot of fun. So why exactly am I not giving it a 4 or 5 star write-up? Well, it's because of the pacing of the film. I think it's a little bit sluggish. I really feel like the movie could have benefited from much tighter pacing, but it just drags on. And it kind of gets to the point where you're just sitting there thinking, at a certain point, without spoiling anything, there's a scene that feels like it would have been the perfect opportunity for the climax of the film, like the big high point of the movie. It would have been a good time to end the film with a slight little epilogue afterwards. But then suddenly a new character is introduced right out of nowhere, and the movie just goes on for another 30 minutes. It has the same problem I think Detroit had, but to a much greater degree. Whereas in Detroit, at least that movie had a lot of characters and arcs to sort of resolve. This movie, on the other hand, I feel had the perfect opportunity to end at a certain point, and then it just went on and on. It did kind of kill a lot of the goodwill I had towards it up to that point. And look, maybe it's just me. Maybe I'm the only one that feels that way about the movie. And like I said, it's not a bad movie, it's a very good one. It's just not a great movie in my opinion. But despite my misgivings with the movie, it is still a very entertaining movie with witty script, sharp and confident directing, excellent performances and very fun and quirky characters that makes it an enjoyable watch overall. So I'm going to give Logan Lucky a 7 out of 10. Despite my misgivings with the film, I definitely recommend seeing it. If you're into heist movies and you like movies with weird and quirky characters, I definitely recommend checking it out. And even if I do have issues with the film, I'll definitely be watching it again at some point in the future. Thank you for watching, I hope you enjoyed this video. I'll be back soon with reviews from It, Mother, Wind River, American Assassin, and Kingsman the Golden Circle. But in the meantime, feel free to like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to my channel. I can also be found on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And until next time, I'm Danny Quinn, and I hope you have a pleasant evening.